Hello people, this is Aryan from Code Grind, and in today's video we'll be covering a very interesting topic of CSS, which is the CSS pseudo classes. We'll be talking about them and discussing a total of 10 pseudo classes, not covering some very common ones like the hover class and all. I will talk about them, but they're not included in the list of 10. So we will talk about what are pseudo classes, how to use them, and we'll be talking about a lot of them. So let's get straight into it. So what actually are pseudo classes? They are actually used to define a particular state of an element of your web page, and whenever that state is initiated, the particular set of properties defined under that pseudo class will be applied to your element. So not making it more complicated, and let's start with our first pseudo class, which is the lang pseudo class. And yeah, so here it is, the lang. My caps lock is on. Okay, lang. So this is the pseudo class. Now we'll be looking into how this functions and why this is used. So there are times when your website is bilingual or let's say multilingual, and you want to differentiate between different languages. Let's say for now you have a different languages like English and Chinese in your web page, and you want your English language to be of black color, which is the default color, and your Chinese to be of red color. So what we will do is, let's say we have two different paragraphs. This one is English and then this one is Chinese. Yeah, now obviously I have written Chinese in English, but because I don't know Chinese, obviously. Now here we will use the lang attribute and apply the code of English, which is en. You can use any code. I am using en because it is the default code of English, and in here I will use the code of Chinese, which is zh. So now that our browser knows that it is en language and it is zh language, here in the css we can go and define different properties. So first of all we will use p:lang. So now one thing, colon is always used for pseudo classes. You can't use double colons. The difference between colons and double colons, I've already explained it in one of my FAQs video. I'll give a link in the description. You can watch them and learn about the difference and then go come back to watch this video. So I prefer you go watch that one first. So here in this p:lang, so and here we'll write the language code, which is en, let's say, and here we'll go give it a color of black. Okay, so now first visit our web page. So here you can see we have English and Chinese, two languages. Then what we will do is we will select p:lang and zh. Here we will give it a color of red. So what this will do is it will select a paragraph tag which has the language attribute and whose value is zh. So here you see Chinese has been given the value of red, the color of red. So this was our first pseudo class, which is the lang class, and this was the purpose of it. Now let's move on to our further classes. So there are the child type selectors in our next class. So this is p dot first child, we have p dot last child, p dot nth child, and so on. So I have a separate video dedicated to the child type selectors. You can go watch them. The child type selectors are not included in the list of 10. I won't be wasting any more time on it. As I told you, I'll give a link in the description and you can go watch them. So the further pseudo classes which I'm going to talk about mainly cover input forms, how you can make your input forms more interactive so that the user enjoys typing information in them. So that is what we will be mainly focusing on. So let's start with our first class, which is the checked pseudo class, and it is mainly used for your checkboxes and radio buttons. So let's say if in our HTML we have this input checkbox and this input radio. Okay, so we have these two classes, input checkbox and input radio. So these two elements. Now what we will do is, here in our browser we can see we have checkbox and radio. Now we'll go to our CSS and select all the input elements which have the checked attribute. So what is checked attribute? The checked pseudo class. So whenever we check any of these input elements, let's say if we check the checkbox or check the radio button, check means simply to select. So these set of properties will run. Let's say I want this height to become 100 and width to become 100 as well. So now whenever I will select my checkbox or a radio button, its height will increase to 100 pixel and width will increase to 100 pixels as well. I check on it and its height increases. I check on the radio button, its size increases. I uncheck it and the CSS properties are not applied on it now because it is unchecked. So this is what the checked property is used for. It is mainly used when you are custom designing your checkboxes and radio buttons. Let's say in the case, instead of a checkbox you have a toggle switch, then this at pseudo class is used the most. How to design a toggle switch, if you want to know about it, I have a video on it, go watch it. It will make your website more interactive because obviously toggle switches are more have more use cases than checkbox and they look more attractive as well. So this was our first pseudo class, which is the checked. You can also do one more thing here. In here you can also apply checked, so which will mean by default whenever the page is loaded this checkbox will be checked. So by default it is checked. Even if I reload, it is already checked and its height is 100 and width is 100 as well. I uncheck it and it goes back to the normal form. You can do the same for your radio button as well. Now let's move on to our next pseudo class, which is disabled. So there are cases when you want your input to be disabled. You don't want the user to type in anything. Let's say if I have input type text and make it disabled. So these are disabled checked. These are attributes which you can provide to your input elements. You can obviously make them disabled is equal to true or checked is equal to true. It is not required, but you can write it like that. I simply write disabled and checked without the true value. So input type text, which is disabled. Here if I click on it, oh, I am able to write. That's weird. Okay, I have the wrong spelling. Now when I click on it, you can see I am not able to type because it is disabled. So we can style this disabled as well. So let's say if I have input which is disabled, again the wrong spelling, I don't know what's wrong with me. So here what this does is it will select every input element which is disabled. So now we can provide it with some CSS properties, such as I can make its background color go to light gray so that it will look like, yeah, it's disabled. So that's basically it. We don't have much to discuss about it. I am sure you got the concept. Now here we have another property which is the exact opposite of disabled, which is enabled. So enabled, and what this will do is it will select all the input elements which are enabled, that means which are not disabled. So now if I have another input type, let's say input type text, now this one is enabled, so the CSS property will be applied to the enabled ones and it will be removed from the disabled. So you see this one was the disabled. It has got a very light border, therefore you might not be able to see it, but here the enabled one has been provided with the light gray background color. Let's also select the disabled and give it a border of, let's say, 1 pixel solid red. So you see the disabled one has got the red border and the enabled one has got the light gray background color. So these are the two pseudo classes, enabled and disabled. Now let's move on to our next pseudo classes, which are going to be the focus and the hover pseudo class. So what is focus and what is hover? Hover is obviously not included in the list, as I already told you, but we'll be talking about it as many people might not know about it. So focus is used for anchor tags, buttons, or your input types, basically for anything which can be clicked on. So if I select input focus pseudo class and let's say give it a border of 1 pixel solid green. Now whenever I will click on any of the input fields, then this focus pseudo class will get activated, this state will be initiated and this property will be applied. So now let's go back to this. Here now when I click on it, you see it got a border of green. We are not able to see it because of the outline. So let's make its outline as none. Now when we go back and now when I click on it, you see the border has become green. This is because of the focus pseudo class. So even if I have an anchor tag, let's say this one, and I have click here. So now instead of input, I make it A. Hit save. Now we have click, and when I click on it, you see it gets this border of green. This is because of the focus pseudo class. You can also make it happen in your buttons, and yeah, this is basically it for the focus pseudo class. Now let's move on, and we have hover. Hover is basically something which we all know about. Hover is the state of mouse over any element. So whenever I put my mouse over this element, it will get the border of green. It is the most commonly used pseudo class and which basically every front-end developer knows about. So we have covered a lot of properties till now. Now let's move on to our next one, which is the in-range pseudo class. It is again for input types. So let's say if I have an input of number and I don't want to the user to type anything other than the range of 1 to 10. So here what I will do is I will get the min to 1 and the max to 10. So min is 1 and max is 10. Now anything outside of this range will be considered out range, and anything inside this range will be considered as in range. Now I'll go over here, select my input element, apply single colon, which is used for pseudo classes, and then the pseudo class name, which is in range. And let's say whenever our value is in range of which we have specified, we want the border to be of 1 pixel solid green. So by default the green border will be applied. If you don't have any value, then this green border will be applied. But since our value was of since our range was from 1 to 10, okay, let's first apply this outline to none. Yeah, now since our value was from 1 to 10, the range, if I write anything outside of that range, then this green border will be removed, because we have applied green border only when the value is in range. Now if I say I write 0, then you see the green border has been removed. But if I write anything inside the range, let's 2, then the border remains. 3, 4, 5, the border remains. If I write 11, the border goes. So this is a very uncommon and very rarely used CSS pseudo class, but it can be very useful if you are working with, say, an e-commerce website and you want the user to apply counters such that plus plus add the quantity or increment the quantity or decrement the quantity, then this class can be very useful. Yeah, so this was it for the in-range pseudo class. Now let's move on to the next class, which is the not pseudo class. It is you can consider it kind of a negation pseudo class. So let's first do that, use this, and then you will come to know about it. So this is a not pseudo class, and here, okay, so let's say if I have, you can apply anything inside this brackets as well. You can apply another pseudo class in it. So let's say if I have enabled, so not enabled, that means disabled, obviously. So not is basically kind of it works as a negation to whatever pseudo class we put inside the brackets of it. So if I have enabled here in here, so not enabled, that means disabled, and whatever CSS properties you write inside it will work as disabled. Now if I have disabled over here, so not disabled, that means enabled, and it will work like that. Not in range, so if your value is not in range, then these properties will be applied. Let's say border 1 pixels solid red. Now when the values will not be in range, then the border of red will be applied. So let's go here, and right now we don't have any value, so nothing is applied. And let's say if I have -1, so you see this is not in our range, therefore the red border has been applied. Again, this outline has covered it. Let's remove it again. Yeah, so you see this value is out of range, that means it is not in range, therefore this border has been applied. If I put a value in range, then this red border won't be applied. So this is the use of the not selector. It can be helpful, and it obviously is helpful. I have used it in a lot of situations. You can also use it. Now let's move on to the next one, which is the root pseudo class. It is not used to define a particular state, but it is very specific and mainly used for defining variables in CSS. So let's say if I have a variable theme color of a website, I can name the variable. If you don't know what CSS variables are, then you can go watch one of my crash courses on CSS variables. You will come to know about everything which you require to work with CSS variables. And yeah, so root pseudo class is basically used to define the variables. You can also use your HTML tag name to define variables, and the body tag also, but we use the root pseudo selector because of its very high specificity. So this was it about the root selector. Next in line we have the valid CSS pseudo class. So this is again used for input forms. Let's say we have input valid. So what are valid and invalid things? After valid we will also talk about invalid. So let's say if I have input type as URL, we don't need this min and max in URL, and then we have an input of email. So email and which what is that in email and URL, there are some specific things which the HTML provides us by default, that the URL should always contain an HTTP or HTTPS, these double slashes, a domain name. So this is a must in URL. If you don't provide it, it won't consider it as an URL, or it won't consider it as a valid entry. And in email, you should always have your email, let's say XYZ, the @ sign, then your email provider, so email service provider XYZ, and then the dot whatever your domain extension is. So these are the valid things when you're working with email type and URL type. I guess you must know about it. And now in here, whenever our value inside the input is valid, then we will want a border of 1 pixels solid green, and whenever the values are invalid, we want its border to be of red in color. So we'll select the invalid pseudo class and give it a border of 1 pixels solid red. So now let's move on to the browser. Over here you can see by default green pseudo class is applied as we don't have any value in here. Now one more thing which I always forget is outline of none. I don't like having outlines in my input types, they just ruin the design of them. So now this one is the URL. So if I write HTTP, so you see I haven't written HTTP, it doesn't have the domain, therefore it is an invalid value for now, and it has been provided with the border of 1 pixel solid red. If I write the full HTTP Google, so you see the domain has been provided and now it is a valid entry. In the email XYZ, we don't have the @ and we don't have the email service provider name, therefore it is an invalid entry for now. I write @ I write XYZ, and it becomes a valid entry and it is working just fine. So yeah, this was about valid and invalid. What you can also do is, instead of writing invalid, you can go with the not selector and go with the valid over here. So not valid, that obviously means invalid. Yeah, so I guess we have covered every kind of a selector. So this was it for CSS pseudo classes. These will definitely make your website input forms very interactive, and you can obviously apply some JavaScript to it to make it more functionable. You can watch my video on password validator, which is a great example of input forms, how to make your input forms interactive. I'll give a link in the description to that one as well. Now thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, then do like the video and subscribe to my channel for more such tips on CSS and JavaScript. And don't forget to watch my shorts, they are very informative, short and informative. You'll get a lot of tips on how to use CSS and JavaScript in a more efficient way. So thank you for watching.